The Great American Museum of Natural History Heist. The autumn of 1964 was crisp in New York City, and the American Museum of Natural History stood majestically on Central Park West, its Gothic revival architecture housing some of the world's most precious treasures. Inside the Morgan Hall of Gems and Minerals on the fourth floor, behind simple glass cases, lay gemstones worth millions, the 563-carat Star of India sapphire, the 100-carat DeLong Star ruby, and the Eagle diamond among them. What the museum's administrators didn't know is that 3 young men from Florida had been studying their security for months, preparing for what would become known as the jewel heist of the century. The unlikely conspirators. Jack Roland Murphy, known to his friends as Murph the Surf, was a contradiction wrapped in tanned skin and bleached hair. By day, he was a championship surfer riding the waves off Miami Beach, his athletic prowess earning him national recognition. By night, he was something else entirely, a sophisticated cat burglar with an appetite for high-stakes theft that matched his hunger for the perfect wave. Murphy's partner in crime was Alan Dale Kuhn, a 26-year-old drifter with a sharp mind and nimble fingers. The two had met through their shared love of surfing and discovered they had another passion in common: the thrill of theft. Their third accomplice, Roger Frederick Clark, would serve as their wheelman and lookout, his nervous energy making him perfect for the role of the getaway driver. The trio had already established their criminal credentials earlier in 1964 when they brazenly robbed actress Eva Gabor and her stockbroker husband, Richard Brown, of a $25,000 diamond ring. The crime went unsolved at the time, but it would later become the thread that unraveled their entire operation: the Reconnaissance. In the late summer of 1964, Murphy and Kuhn arrived in New York City like tourists, checking into the Cambridge House Hotel on the Upper West Side, but their intentions were far from innocent sightseeing. They had come to case the American Museum of Natural History, specifically targeting the J.P. Morgan collection in the Hall of Gems and Minerals. For weeks, they posed as visitors, studying the museum's layout with the methodical precision of military strategists. They discovered that the Morgan Hall was far from the museum's most popular attraction indeed. The restrooms received more foot traffic than the gem collection. This relative obscurity worked in their favor, as it meant fewer eyes and less attention from security guards. The burglars' research revealed stunning security weaknesses that seemed almost too good to be true. The museum's alarm system was rudimentary at best, with no motion detectors or sophisticated surveillance equipment. More incredibly, they discovered that one of the fourth-floor windows in the gem hall was routinely left open for ventilation, propped ajar with a simple wooden stick. Murphy and Kuhn spent hours studying the museum's exterior, noting the architectural details that would prove crucial to their plan. The building's Gothic revival design featured numerous ledges, decorative stonework, and, most importantly, a pillar positioned directly above the habitually open window. They observed the patterns of the security guards, noting when shifts changed and identifying the periods of minimal surveillance. During their reconnaissance, they also studied the interior layout of the Morgan Hall. The gems were displayed in traditional glass cases, not the reinforced, alarm display cases one might expect for such valuable items. The thieves noted that the cases appeared to be standard museum display furniture, secured with simple locks that could be bypassed with the right tools. The plan. By October 1964, Murphy and Kuhn had developed a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. They would approach the museum from Central Park West, scale the building's exterior, and gain entry through the perpetually open fourth-floor window. The plan relied on stealth, timing, and the museum's laughably inadequate security measures. The thieves procured the tools they would need: a sharp glass cutter, heavy-duty duct tape, a squeegee, and most importantly, a strong rope. They also acquired a white Cadillac for their getaway vehicle, reasoning that an expensive car would attract less attention than a beat-up getaway car in the affluent, Upper West Side neighborhood. The plan called for Murphy and Kuhn to execute the actual break-in, while Clark remained in the Cadillac, circling the block to watch for police and provide a quick escape route. They chose a late October night when the museum would be closed, but street activity would still provide some cover for their unusual nighttime climbing expedition. It's the night of October 29, 1964. As darkness fell over Manhattan on October 29, 1964, the 3 conspirators put their plan into motion. Clark positioned himself behind the wheel of the white Cadillac, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he began his endless circling of the museum block. His job was to watch for police patrols and maintain radio contact with Murphy and Kuhn, though their communication would be limited to hand signals and brief encounters when the car passed by. Murphy and Kuhn approached the museum from Central Park West, carrying their equipment in simple bags that wouldn't attract attention from late-night pedestrians. The Gothic revival facade of the museum loomed above them, its stone gargoyles seeming to watch their approach with stony indifference. The two thieves located the pillar they had identified during their reconnaissance, a decorative stone column that rose alongside the building's exterior, positioned directly above their target window. With practiced efficiency, they secured their rope to the pillar, testing its strength with several sharp tugs. The rope held firm, and Murphy prepared to make the descent. What happened next was a feat of athletic daring that would have impressed even the most seasoned cat burglar. Murphy, his surfer's physique and natural athleticism serving him well, gripped the rope and began his descent along the museum's exterior wall. The building's facade was a maze of decorative stonework, gargoyles, and ledges that provided both handholds and obstacles as he carefully lowered himself toward the fourth-floor window. The night air was cold against his face as Murphy dangled 125 feet above the streets of Manhattan, his feet searching for purchase on the building's stone surface. One wrong move would send him plummeting to the sidewalk below, but his years of surfing had given him an almost supernatural sense of balance and body control. As Murphy reached the level of the fourth-floor window, he could see the faint outline of the opening they had discovered during their reconnaissance. The window was indeed propped open, just as they had observed during their weeks of surveillance. Using his feet, Murphy carefully pushed against the window sash, lowering it enough to create an opening large enough for a human body. With a final swing on the rope, Murphy positioned himself at the window opening and slipped inside the Morgan Hall of Gems and Minerals. The silence inside the museum was absolute, broken only by the distant sounds of New York City traffic filtering through the building's thick walls. He quickly signaled to Kuhn, who followed the same route, his own athletic build allowing him to navigate the treacherous descent with equal skill. Once inside the Morgan Hall, Murphy and Kuhn found themselves in a cathedral of geological wonders. The moonlight filtering through the windows cast eerie shadows across the display cases, each one containing treasures that represented millions of years of the Earth's history and untold monetary value. The thieves activated small flashlights, their beams dancing across the gems like captured starlight. Their primary targets were immediately visible. The Star of India, 563-carat sapphire that was one of the largest star sapphires in the world, sat in its case like a captured piece of the night sky. The DeLong Star ruby, weighing 100 carats, glowed with an inner fire that seemed to pulse in the flashlight beams. The Eagle Diamond, a 26-carat yellow diamond, sparkled with an intensity that made it seem almost alive. But Murphy and Kuhn were not content with just the three most famous gems. Their weeks of reconnaissance had identified 24 valuable stones that they believed they could carry and fence. They had memorized the location of each target, turning their theft into a methodical shopping expedition. Working with practiced efficiency, they began their systematic assault on the display cases. The glass cutter made quick work of the case panels, the tool's diamond edge slicing through the glass with barely a whisper. They applied duct tape to the glass before cutting, preventing the severed pieces from falling and creating noise that might alert security guards. Case by case, they worked their way through the hall, using their squeegee to gather the loose gems and smaller stones. The larger pieces were carefully wrapped and secured in their bags. The entire operation took less than an hour, a testament to their meticulous planning and the museum's inadequate security measures. With their bags heavy with stolen treasures, Murphy and Kuhn prepared to make their escape. The same rope that had carried them into the museum would now serve as their highway to freedom. Murphy went first, his athletic prowess again proving invaluable, as he navigated the building's exterior with a heavy bag of gems weighing him down. The ascent was more challenging than the descent had been. The added weight of the stolen gems made every movement more difficult, and the strain on the rope was considerable. But Murphy's years of physical conditioning served him well, and he managed to climb back to the pillar where their rope was secured. Kuhn followed, his own ascent complicated by the awkward distribution of weight in his bag of gems. The stones clinked softly against each other as he climbed, each sound seeming to echo off the museum's stone walls like a beacon calling attention to their crime. Once both thieves had reached the pillar, they quickly secured their rope and made their way down to street level. The entire operation, from entry to escape, had taken less than 2 hours. They had successfully executed one of the most audacious heists in New York City history, and incredibly, no one had noticed. Clark, who had spent the night circling the block in the white Cadillac, picked up his accomplices at a predetermined location several blocks from the museum. The three thieves drove through the quiet streets of Manhattan, their bags containing treasures worth millions of dollars, their hearts racing with the adrenaline of their successful crime. The aftermath and initial investigation: the theft was not discovered until the next morning when museum staff arrived for work. The first indication that something was wrong came when a security guard noticed the disturbed display cases in the Morgan Hall. The reality of what had happened became clear quickly. The museum had been robbed of some of its most valuable treasures. The New York Police Department responded immediately, but the crime scene offered few clues. There were no fingerprints on the glass cases, no witnesses to the nighttime break-in, and no obvious signs of how the thieves had gained entry. The open window was initially overlooked as a possible entry point. The idea that someone would climb down the exterior of a 4-story building seemed too far-fetched for investigators to consider seriously. The museum's administration was forced to confront the embarrassing reality of their security failures. The lack of adequate alarm systems, the absence of motion detectors, and the practice of leaving windows open for ventilation all contributed to making the heist possible. The institution that housed some of the world's most valuable gems had been protected by little more than basic locks and part-time security guards. The FBI was called in to assist with the investigation, given the interstate nature of the crime and the value of the stolen items. Federal agents began the painstaking process of analyzing the crime scene, interviewing museum staff, and attempting to reconstruct how the thieves had gained access to the Morgan Hall. The investigation into the museum heist began with the basics. Who had the knowledge and skill to pull off such a sophisticated crime? The FBI agents assigned to the case, led by experienced investigators familiar with high-end theft operations, began building profiles of potential suspects. The method of entry: once investigators finally understood how the thieves had gained access to the building. SUGGSTED, perpetrators with significant athletic ability and nerves of steel. The precision of the theft, with the burglars targeting specific high-value items while leaving other valuable pieces untouched, indicated detailed advanced planning and inside knowledge of the collection. Investigators began reaching out to informants in the criminal underworld, seeking information about anyone who might have been planning or discussing a museum heist. They also contacted police departments in other cities, looking for similar crimes that might have been committed by the same perpetrators. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The investigation into the Eva Gabor robbery earlier in 1964 had continued separately from the museum heist. But detectives working that case had developed leads that would prove crucial to solving both crimes. The robbery of actress Eva Gabor and her husband had initially appeared to be an isolated incident, a simple jewelry theft that would likely never be solved. But Detective Frank Welch of the Miami Beach Police Department had been working the case methodically, following up on every lead and building a comprehensive file on the crime. Welch had developed information suggesting that the Gabor robbery was connected to a group of young men from the Miami area, who were known to associate with high-end criminals. The detective had been tracking the movements and associations of several suspects, including Jack Murphy and Alan Kuhn. When news of the museum heist reached Miami, Detective Welch immediately recognized similarities between the two crimes. Both involved sophisticated planning, athletic skill, and a focus on high-value gems and jewelry. Both crimes also demonstrated a level of audacity that suggested the perpetrators were either very confident or very reckless. Welch shared his intelligence with the FBI agents working the museum case, and the connection began to solidify. The investigative team now had names and faces to associate with their crime, transforming what had been a mystery into a manhunt. Armed with the intelligence from Detective Welch, FBI agents began intensive surveillance of Murphy, Kuhn, and their known associates. They tracked the suspects' movements, monitored their communications, and began building a comprehensive case that would connect them to both the Gabor robbery and the museum heist. The investigation revealed that Murphy and Kuhn had been living well beyond their apparent means since the museum heist. They were staying in expensive hotels, frequenting high-end restaurants and nightclubs, and displaying a level of affluence that didn't match their known sources of income. Federal agents also discovered that some of the stolen gems had begun appearing in the criminal marketplace. Fences and dealers in hot merchandise were being approached by intermediaries seeking to sell unusually high-quality gems, stones that matched the descriptions of items stolen from the museum. The investigative team decided to set up a sting operation, using undercover agents posing as buyers for the stolen gems. The plan was to trace the gems back to their source and gather evidence that would directly link the suspects to the museum heist. The FBI's undercover operation was a masterpiece of patient police work. Federal agents posing as wealthy collectors willing to pay premium prices for rare gems made contact with intermediaries who claimed to have access to extraordinary stones. The agents were particularly interested in gems that matched the descriptions of the Star of India, the DeLong Star Ruby, and the Eagle Diamond. The sting operation required months of careful work, with agents building relationships with dealers and gradually working their way up the chain toward the original thieves. Each contact was carefully documented, each conversation recorded, and each transaction monitored to build a comprehensive case. The breakthrough came when an intermediary contacted the undercover agents with an offer to sell a large star, sapphire, that perfectly matched the description of the Star of India. The asking price was substantial, but the agents expressed interest and began negotiating for a face-to-face meeting. On January 8, 1965, the carefully orchestrated investigation came to a dramatic conclusion. Federal agents, working in coordination with local police, moved simultaneously in New York and Florida to arrest the suspects in the museum heist. Jack Murphy was arrested in Miami, where he had been continuing his double life as a surfer and high-end thief. The arrest was made without incident, but Murphy's calm demeanor suggested he had been expecting this moment. Alan Kuhn was arrested in New York, where he had been attempting to negotiate the sale of several of the stolen gems. Roger Clark, the getaway driver, was arrested shortly after his two accomplices. The coordinated arrests were designed to prevent the suspects from warning each other or disposing of evidence, and the strategy proved successful. The arrests made headlines across the country, with newspapers focusing on the unusual backgrounds of the suspects. The image of handsome young surfers turned sophisticated thieves captured the public imagination, and the case became a sensation. Following the arrests, investigators focused on recovering the stolen gems. Some of the stones were found in the suspects' possession, while others had been hidden in various locations around New York and Florida. The Star of India was discovered in a bus station locker in Miami, where Murphy had hidden it after the heist. The DeLong Star Ruby was also recovered, though it had been damaged during the theft. The Eagle Diamond and several other gems were found in safety deposit boxes that the thieves had rented under false names. However, not all of the stolen gems were recovered. Some of the smaller stones had been sold to dealers and collectors, and these gems disappeared into the underground market. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, several valuable pieces from the museum's collection were never found. The recovery efforts revealed the sophisticated nature of the thieves' operation. They had established multiple hiding places, used false identities to rent storage facilities, and had begun developing a network of dealers who could help them fence the stolen goods. The trial of Murphy, Kuhn, and Clark began in early 1965 and attracted significant media attention. The prosecution painted a picture of sophisticated criminals who had planned and executed one of the most audacious heists in American history. The defense attempted to portray the defendants as young men who had made poor choices but were not hardened criminals. The evidence against the three suspects was overwhelming. The FBI had documented their movements, recorded their conversations, and recovered many of the stolen gems from their possession. The case against them was so strong that all three defendants eventually pleaded guilty to the charges. On April 6, 1965, Jack Murphy, Alan Kuhn, and Roger Clark were each sentenced to 3 years in prison at New York's Rikers Island Correctional Facility. The sentences were considered relatively light, given the magnitude of their crime. But the judge noted that the defendants were young and had no prior serious criminal records. The The Eva Gabor case was eventually dropped after the actress refused to testify. But the museum heist convictions were sufficient to send all three thieves to prison. The museum heist had profound implications for security practices at cultural institutions across the United States. The American Museum of Natural History was forced to completely overhaul its security systems, installing modern alarm systems, motion detectors, and reinforced display cases. The case became a textbook example of how even the most valuable collections could be vulnerable to theft if proper security measures were not in place. Museums across the country began reviewing their own security protocols, and many implemented significant upgrades to prevent similar crimes. The heist also highlighted the importance of cooperation between different law enforcement agencies. The solution to the case came through the sharing of intelligence between local police in Miami and federal agents in New York, demonstrating the value of coordinated investigations. The legacy of the Great Heist. The American Museum of Natural History heist of 1964 remains one of the most famous jewel thefts in American history. The combination of athletic daring, meticulous planning, and the thieves' unusual backgrounds created a crime that captured the public imagination and became the subject of books, movies, and television documentaries. Jack Murphy, the ringleader of the operation, would go on to face much more serious charges later in his life, including murder convictions that would send him to prison for decades. But he would always be remembered primarily for the night he swung down the side of a Manhattan museum and made off with some of the world's most precious gems. The case also served as a wake-up call for the entire museum community, leading to fundamental changes in how cultural institutions protect their collections. The simple glass cases and open windows that made the 1964 heist possible were replaced with sophisticated security systems that make such crimes nearly impossible today. The Star of India, the DeLong Star Ruby, and the other recovered gems were eventually returned to their display cases in the Morgan Hall. But now they are protected by alarm systems, motion detectors, and reinforced glass that would challenge even the most athletic and determined thieves. The open window that provided entry to Murphy and Kuhn has been permanently sealed, a small but significant change that symbolizes the museum's commitment to never again being the victim of such an audacious crime. Today, visitors to the American Museum of Natural History can still see the gems that were stolen that October night in 1964, but they can also reflect on how a group of young surfers from Florida managed to pull off one of the most spectacular heists in criminal history, changing forever how we protect our most precious cultural treasures. Subscribe for this and many more stories.